Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the AME Food Testing Show. This is Andy Marino. Today's topic is Food Production Operation Risk Assessment with Felix Amiri, Food Safety and Quality Systems Specialist at Amiri Food Industry Support Services. Felix has consulted food production firms such as Unifine Richardson, Golden Valley Farms, Heinz, Martin Ped Foods, Yum Brands International, and Vese Foods. Felix has conducted food safety and quality system audits in facilities and distribution centers in Canada and the U.S. He's certified as a third-party auditor for GMA-SAFE and holds BRC Third Party Auditor certificates for the Global Standard Food, Issue 5. Felix has completed the Implementing Safe Quality Food, or SFQ, auditor training. He's certified to conduct audits under the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture and Alberta Agriculture HACCP Advantage programs. He serves as a lead auditor under the Ontario Food Inspection Program of the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources. He also leads various food safety and quality system audits with QMI-SAI Global. Felix graduated with a bachelor's degree in industrial education from the University of New Brunswick and a diploma in food technology from the Marine Institute, Memorial University, in St. John's, Newfoundland. He is certified by the American Society for Quality as a quality auditor. His other qualifications include Certificate in Heat Processing and Container Closure Evaluation of the Canadian Food Processors Association, the Fisheries Council of Canada, and the Meat Packers Council of Canada, HACCP implementation with Guelph Food Technology Center, Quality Assurance for the Food Industry, the Guelph Food Quality Technology Center, Analytical Problem Solving and Project Management from Kemper Tegro, Inc., and professional development training completed at the American Institute of Baking in Manhattan, Kansas. Felix has a very impressive resume. Can you please let our audience know any more of your qualifications that you might bring to today's conversation?
Well, Andy, thank you very much. You've been quite generous in explaining what my qualifications are. And, it basically covers a lot of the areas that I've been qualified to participate in the food industry. And it's my pleasure to really be a part of the food industry and where it's headed and where it's going. We know there have been challenges, and this is why I suppose we're doing this interview in order to take this aspect of it and share it with the rest who may already have some interest or who may already have some expertise in risk assessment.
Well, Felix, today's discussion begins with a basic question. What is a food production risk assessment?
Yeah, it's one of the things that often perhaps is done in a haste, too much of a haste, as in some instances, I think, because it's the key to actually implementing strong programs. And a food operation risk assessment can be simply be as simple as the hazard analysis that is introduced through the HACCP program, or it could be a more comprehensive assessment that considers the risks to consumers, the risks to the product quality, risks to the environment, and risks to the business. And some of these other aspects are usually not included in the typical hazard analysis. However, they all constitute part of risk assessment, and many operations do these assessments perhaps by different departments, but collectively they constitute what I would call risk assessment for a food operation.
So in looking at how internal staff and the food safety team identifies the risks, how does a food safety officer identify the major risks to their production?
Yeah, it's really the identification. So in the simplest form, as I mentioned, a risk assessment for a food operation is the process of identifying the possibility of harm caused to the consumer due to the use of a product from the operation. This also must include the determination of the level of risk. So in other words, you have to name the risk and say how much of a risk it is. The process for a food safety specialist or a food safety officer, the process must consider the structures of the operation. This will include the buildings, the exteriors, the grounds, and the infrastructure inside the building. All of these may contribute to risks to the product. The setups, how the equipment are set up, the layout, the flow, the ability to clean around this so you don't have haverage, all of these need to be considered as part of the risk assessment. What risk do these pose? Personal habits pose risks. These all have to be included in the risk assessment. So in other words, when you're identifying the risk assessment, you have to consider all of these aspects: input materials, operation activities, processes, conditions within the environment as these conditions change, because when you start with a new building, everything is fine and clean. Over the years, you start to get flaking paint, and you don't know what chemical contaminant may come with that, and you may have rust and particle of metals falling apart if the conditions in the environment are not properly maintained. So all of these are considerations that the food safety officer must be thinking about in doing the risk assessment. You have to consider the vectors, the rodents, the air. These are the carriers of contaminants. Even persons and equipment that go in and out of the facility, all of these are carriers and vectors that must be considered in a risk assessment process that is to be conducted by the food officer. Typically, you don't want to do this by a single individual. You want to put heads together. That's why the HACCP program recommends a HACCP team, or food safety team. There are at least 6 basic questions that the food officer need to ask and should ask, and there may be others, but here are some that I suggest. The food officer or the team must ask, first of all, is it possible for the product from this operation to cause harm or injury to the consumer? And then once we know yes, of course we know in the food industry the typical answer is yes. What types of harm can the product cause? And so you start to go into the specifics. What are there biological harms? Is there chemical harm, physical harm, or even intrinsic characteristic harm? For instance, a peanut is intrinsically an allergen, and this could be a harm to some consumers, but not to others. All of these have to be specifically identified in terms of the risk. The next question that needs to be asked is, what is the likelihood? And this is very crucial and often confused with the severity. The likelihood is simply the rate of occurrence. Will it occur and how frequently? And then in terms of saying how much of a risk it is, you have to go on and ask, what is the degree of severity that a consumer is most likely to suffer? And you will be considering in this instance the most vulnerable consumer, because the strong and people who are able to withstand the risk would not be the best, the worst case scenario. So in most cases, you want to consider the worst case scenario in identifying the risk so that you input the resources that are necessary to control it, because the most vulnerable victim suffering the harm is one too many. So those are some of the questions. Another question that you may want to ask is, what are the intrinsic and or other contributors to the kinds of harm that the product is likely to cause? Where and how can the possible kinds of harm be prevented or at least reduced to an acceptable level? So I've numbered about at least 6 questions that a food safety officer needs to ask. So there are some widely used tools for properly conducting risk assessments or hazard analysis in the industry today. Some use the hazard risk assessment matrices and the hazard analysis decision tree that often come with hazard programs. These are some tools that provide questions that lead you through the process of identifying the risks and measuring them. This typically consists of a series of questions and answers, and once you go through the process, for some of the ones that are available there, you would have come up with a reasonable number of risks that are associated with your type of operation. I don't know if this answers some of the questions, that question particularly. Is there any other thing you would like to know?
Yes, Francis, you've answered a very comprehensive range of issues. What I think that's out there that is not clearly identified, you and I chatted about this earlier, is that quite often food safety officers are drawn in from other types of positions and specialties, quite often from food safety or quality assurance or food operations. So they're really multitasking, and the entire food safety operation is not quite as focused. Would that be reflective of your experience?
You're very correct, Andy. I think the limitation of resources have forced a lot of operations to cut corners, you might say, in employing individuals to take care of risk assessment and manage the food safety program. In some way, you don't fault them because, after all, businesses are in that business for profit. However, it comes to a point where you have to be, to some degree, altruistic. You have to consider your consumer. You don't want to harm anyone, and so while it's somehow attractive to implement programs with the minimum of cost, sometimes it may be important to invest because essentially when your consumers trust you, you get a return for that investment. So there's, as you mentioned, Andy, there's a school of thought that says, well, if we can use anybody to fulfill that role in our company, we're okay, and since we have had no issue, then we're all right. But it could be that the issues are really not identified because the expertise is not in place. So it's one of those situations where you don't know the actual cause. So unfortunately, in some instances, companies have run into serious problems before they discovered that they needed to use the right expertise. So yes, it's one of the issues faced by companies there that I see.
Well, taking that as a launch point, what are some of the most effective measures that food safety officers can use to assess the risk of their products harming consumers?
Sorry, could you repeat that question again? Sorry,
yes.
I didn't quite catch that.
So what are the most effective measures that food safety officers can use to assess the risk of their products harming consumers?
Yeah, the food safety officer have to start, first of all, where we started from, that identifying that risk. And there has to be a definition, an establishment of what is considered to be a risk. In order to implement effective measures, you want to really identify from your operation what causes harm to the consumer. There are the effective measures. There are effective measures that are documented. So consulting existing literature about what is generally known to cause harm will be one of the ways to make sure that your measures are effective. For food operation anywhere in the world, the Codex Alimentarius standards provide a good resource. Now, new information is emerging almost daily, so to speak, and these may be gathered from emerging epidemiological data. And so it will be good for a food safety officer to pay attention to these new data or information in order to implement the right measures that address the emerging problems and risks. There are also some well-established and widely known standards and references provided by the regulatory agencies in different countries. Canada, the U.S., Australia, New Zealand, UK, Netherlands, and so forth have good systems and good standards provided. And some of these provide measures that have been known to be effective. It will be good for a food safety officer to study these standards and apply them in their situation, testing them through the process and validating how those recommendations work for them in order to make their programs effective. Proper research is necessary. Do specific research on specific materials and products of interest to gather information about known risks that are associated with that type of product or material. Even the operation and the product would have data already available that could be drawn from, and of course always customized to meet the actual situations of your operation. Don't just take them and rubber stamp them with your name and think that those are your operations. You have to actually test them through your system. You have to conduct a thorough inspection of structural provisions, equipment, setup, and identify conditions and situations that may cause harm to the consumer. All of these are good steps to make sure that your measures, mitigation measures, are effective. Conduct thorough analysis of all possible agents and sources of harm, the biological, chemical that we mentioned earlier. Establish from known historical facts the likelihood and severity of identified risk, and then take the appropriate action with the team deciding what action is effective. Of course, that could be the theoretical discussion, but always test whatever action you put in place. The most effective measures are those that are put through the test, verified, and validated in the real situations and setups of an operation. A plan is also most effectively implemented if it is managed by properly trained personnel. So for companies to cut corners, maybe doing themselves in, invest the money, research the individual whom you're trying to employ to take the role, and make sure that they have the background knowledge and ongoing knowledge that is acquired through the process of being engaged in that operation and role. Another crucial component of an effective plan is all employees involved are empowered and take ownership of the plan and its outcomes. Actively identify points of real and potential failures, implement preventive actions, monitor implemented actions for effectiveness, and modify if necessary. Maintain the typical continuous improvement cycle. You have to plan, implement, track performance, reassess, modify, implement modifications, track, and back through the cycle. It's as an ongoing basis for making sure that your programs and plans remain effective. I have said a lot. I don't know if that answers some of the points you were looking for, but I'm open for further questions.
Well, Felix, you really addressed a wide range of improvement avenues and suggestions for food safety officers. The next question of interest is, how does a food safety officer improve a food safety plan? Maybe the one that's been existing for a while and that has had success. How do they improve on it?
Yeah, success is very, I would say, it's almost a nebulous term. Success, how do you know you've achieved success? Is every consumer that could possibly consume your product, both now and in the future, protected effectively? So, have you succeeded? Yes, you can look back and see how you've improved from where you were to where you are now, and say, yes, there has been improvement, but you call that success. To me, success in the food industry is that day when no consumer suffers any harm from a food product. Now we know as a result of what we have seen. that's not a thing. It's almost an impossible dream, but it's a good dream, which means that success is a continuous thing. In other words, that's what I'm trying to get to. The food safety officer never rests with never rest. In other words, so success is something that you have to keep reaching for, and of course, some have progressed further than others, and that's all we can really say. That some operations are well ahead of others in terms of protecting the consumer, but there's never an end to it. And so, as I mentioned earlier, that cycle of continuous improvement is how you improve your food safety plan. You have to maintain that typical planning well, using the right resources, the properly trained personnel, and this is both at the management level and at the operations level. The frontline personnel have to be constantly trained and empowered to take ownership of the plan itself and its outcomes. It's an ongoing. So the planning involves all of that, and then you have to implement effectively researched actions to mitigate any harm that products may cause, and go through the cycle of tracking the performance of implemented action, reassessing the situations and actions, making modifications, implementing the modification, tracking the performance of those modifications and effectiveness, and then back through that cycle. So that to improve a food safety plan is an ongoing process through that cycle.
Very good, Felix. Your discussion near the end recommended several steps to document these remediation steps. Can you highlight that just a little bit on the types of things a food safety officer can do to document their improvement? Documentation is something that's well addressed in many standards that exist today that I'm thankful for as an auditor. A lot of the standards have required specifically implemented documentation and document control programs. And that is how, that's one thing that a food safety officer must be very conscious about and mindful of, and actually take proper actions and design a program that manages the document. Of course, we know it's very important to document all aspects of a plan that is implemented to address identified risks. This assures a good historical tracking of actions taken, the effectiveness of such actions, and so on. Now, the documentation forms two parts. There is a saying in the food safety cycle. It says you have to say what you're going to do, you do it, and then you prove it. Now, documentation covers two aspects. The saying what you're going to do. You have to articulate what you're going to do in a documented form, and that forms the basis for training people and ensuring consistency of implemented actions and plans. Otherwise, you have confused approach where different individuals would pursue the particular action in different ways that may not produce consistency. So that documentation aspect of articulating what you're going to do is essential. And then on the proving side, well, if I come to a facility to audit, I did that aspect of proving it is what an auditor comes to look for, because an auditor goes there for a day or two or three or a week for that matter, but that's still a short period compared to the ongoing process. So the auditor will say, while I'm not there, what have you been doing? And show me in your records that you've actually been doing what you say you're going to do, and you are obtaining some results that gives confidence of the effectiveness of your program. And while I'm gone after the audit, give me records to demonstrate that you will continue. So it is very important to document all aspects of the plans and actions taken by an operation, including production records, the quality evaluation records, other records, consumer feedback records, and all of these records are key
for an operation to maintain. And these are all forms of documentation that are essential.
Well, Felix, you highlighted a number of excellent points for food producers. On documentation, I've personally seen clients that have, and I'd like you to respond to each one of these, have used pencil in their written documentation. Would you suggest using pencil or ink in making records?
Yeah, I've seen pencil, but we all know that pencil or whiteouts or shading vigorously to conceal data are some of the forms that immediately would raise questions as to the integrity of the records. So that's really a question of record integrity. It's not recommended because in a situation where you have to prove that you've done things right and so forth, that there's nothing to be hidden, you want your records to be free of such suspicious approaches to making corrections or keeping the records. It's easy to erase a pencil, to be direct with your question. If you use a pencil, it's easy to erase it, and so I cannot say whether it was erased and rewritten. If you use a pencil, there is no integrity in that. And these are some of the reasons why those forms of record keeping are not recommended. Using of pencil, using whiteout to shade out data, previously entered data, or shading vigorously to conceal. And so what I'd like to see as an auditor, when I look at your record, is the same integrity that I would like to see in a bank check. A bank check, you don't white out, you don't shade out, you don't use pencil. These are known, and most people will understand that the reason is because of the integrity of the information.
Additionally, I have actually seen records that are not initialed in pen whenever there's a change. Would you comment on that?
Yes, the initialing is really standing by the change. The individual is basically saying by initialing, you can ask me any time why I changed this and I will explain to you. And that also demonstrates integrity. Without that, it is, of course, is questionable as to who made the change and why, because it may be the wrong person who made the change. Say somebody who does not have expertise to make that data change, but has made the change because of different reasons. So the initialing is essential to specifically identify who made the change, and any inquirer may be able to assess if that person was qualified to make that change or not.
Excellent. Felix, in a kind of a preference, I've performed some audits, and I've seen the entire document in the exact same handwriting, in the exact same pen, and it looks like it was prepared the day before I arrived to perform the audit. I prefer, and I'd like you to offer your suggestions and comments, that each individual that contributed to the document use a different colored pen so it actually looks like a document that has been engaged over a period of time. Would you comment on that suggestion?
That's a good suggestion, Andy, because there are operations with shifts, and if the day shift, the afternoon shift, and the night shift all have the same writing, well, obviously, it's clear that those records do not show the integrity they ought to. So the use of a different colored pen, it has to be with different writings, of course, because if the same person is just changing pens to write it at a time different from when the action actually took place, because there's also the integrity question there. But that's a good suggestion for operations who may be listening to this to take that extra step and provide different color pens, and they have to be pens, as we have said, not pencils, for operators to actually write the records or put their information down according to the shifts and the individuals. Auditors will be able to catch these things, of course, Andy, as you know, you'll be able to identify who was present or who was performing that task at a particular time and check some of the other records and see that the writings don't match. It's easy to identify those kind of things that are not done with integrity. Auditors have ways of detecting things. That's why they're auditors. They can find ways out and records that are consistently the same. So temperatures, for instance, we all know temperatures vary. Even within the time you're taking a temperature, the reading will not be the same. But if somebody's operation is required to take temperatures and everything is the same reading, immediately tells the auditor that something is suspicious, and it's easy to go take the temperature of that particular situation and see if the data is the same. If the data is the same, well, that may be credit to the operation that they've set their systems well to manage. But we all know that temperatures would vary. But those are the kind of things that should be avoided. So that suggestion is very good, to use different colors by different people to put data down.
Well, with that vein of auditors in their responsibility to whoever they're reporting to, I have a question for you. Is an auditor principally a policeman measuring against fixed standards the performance of the audited party, or are they consultants offering their advice to improve the operation of the food production facility?
I'm glad you asked this question, Andy. It's one of the things that I have been discussing with a number of people. Has raised a lot of questions in terms of the consultant with that conflict of interest considerations, and the policeman with that. And the picture I gave is the policeman. If the policeman is there, it's like holding down a bent stick. As soon as the policeman leaves, the bent stick is released, and things are back to whatever they call whether normal or normal way of operating. The policeman approach or the consultant approach in the current marketplace, not recommended for an auditor. An auditor is really helping the facility to assess the risks that exist. So, and that's my approach to it, and I think most auditors will be using that approach, is going and investigating where there may be gaps in terms of the risk assessment and the possible risks through the process. This is why the auditor goes through the documentation to see what has been articulated in terms of the identified risks and how the mitigation measures are implemented, and go on to the facility to see how this is actually taking place in real life and observing things along the way, looking at the structures and setups and so forth to identify other risks. So for an auditor, it's not a simple policeman, there is a standard here, and I'm checking against the standard specifically, because you can run into a situation where the standard does not speak to it specifically. Well, you maybe, if you're not doing the risk assessment, you may just either say give a pass mark for that situation because the standard does not state it, or discuss it with the facility because you've assessed there's a risk so that it could be corrected, and note it as such as maybe an extra observation within your report for the facility to go back to and track what has happened and what will happen in the future as they implement actions. So for me, I would not recommend a consultation because of conflict of interest. If you consult and say this is what you ought to do, well, then if you're representing a third party, that introduces reasons to suspect the interest, personal interest of getting more business or whatever from the operation. But that needs to be avoided. And as a policeman, you really don't want to do that because it just may skew the results of the report because you're only going specifically to the standard, what the standard says, and that's it. Although you have to do that, but you have to infuse your expertise in identifying risks that are obvious, that will be obvious to the operation and yourself as you go through the audit.
Well, Felix, today's discussion has been particularly helpful for, I'm sure, many in our listening audience. In the final few minutes, could you please identify your products and services that are offered by your organization?
Yes, as my title states, I offer food safety systems development auditing, and that includes internal auditing services, and quality systems development. And this includes documentation, setting documents in place, what types of documents to be used, and where they fit in terms of your operation. These are within a broad scope of food safety and quality systems are the services that I offer. I have little. I support database systems for traceability, for instance, preventive maintenance programs, and document control programs that I offer to operations who may be interested, for whom I do consultation work. These are all offered as part of my services, not as products, but they do serve some purposes within the operations. So anything with respect to food safety, systems development, food safety systems assessment, both internal and for auditing companies, I provide services as a freelance auditor that could conduct third-party audits and so forth. So these are some of the services that I offer. My website is some of these I've explained further on my website. I don't know if you have my website address, Andy. Do you have it?
AFISSERVICES.com.
That's correct. So www.AFISservices.com.
Well, Felix, your contributions today have been most welcome, and I'd like to allow you a few minutes now to conclude your remarks.
Yes, it's you might say, my desire to work within the industry, and I call on my colleagues within the industry as food safety experts to work with the different organizations that they're working with to see the picture of the food safety programs worldwide improved to the point of recognition. If you look at the news today with respect to food safety issues, it's almost depressing that we have been doing this work for some time now, and we still have these issues cropping up. I know it's not possible to have 100% reduction or removal or elimination of the issues, but what I see is the spike and low and spike and low. What I should expect us to see is a progressive decrease in issues. And this is possible, I think, and it has been possible for specific organizations, and I don't see why it cannot be possible for the community at large. If we all do proper risk assessments and research the mitigating measures properly and implement these effectively, consistently with cooperation from the frontline workers, I think that it's achievable. The reason we are not achieving it is mainly either due to frontline worker laziness or some other factors that may be cropping in. And so we need to identify these factors and eliminate them. It's my call, my general call. It's what you might say my extracurricular call. And this has been done through the GCSE, the Global Coalition for Sustained Excellence in Food Consumer Protection. Food and health, actually, not just food, drugs as well, and pharmaceuticals are in that global consideration as well. That we are looking to see how this will improve the situations worldwide with respect to the progress that's made in protecting the consumer.
Very good, Felix. I'd like to thank you for your participation today, and look forward to possible future appearances as issues arise in your practice.
Yes.
And
thank you very much.
Wish you a great day.
Yes. Thank you very much, Andy. I appreciate the opportunity, and of course, I'm always open to questions from you and anyone who may be interested. If you have access to contact me through my website and so forth, I'll be glad to work with you and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Felix, and have a great day.
Thank you, Andy.
Bye now.
Bye for now.